Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Good evening. Welcome. Sisters and brothers, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Shabir Razvi. I'll be hosting the program this evening. But before that, I need to always compliment and give thanks to Open Discussions and Gulf Cultural Club for organizing that. In particular, Brother Dr. Saeed Shahabi and Fakir Mendoza. Without them, we would not have the program, and of course, without you, the audience, the guest speakers would be, speaking to an empty room. So I thank you all for turning up this evening as well. We've got a panel that will be talking about the significance of Ashura, notions of martyrdom, justice, and reform. I will just start with one couplet from a famous Urdu poet, and he said, "Insaniyat ko do jaagne do, har qaum pukaregi hamare hain Hussain." What that means, roughly translated, Brother Dawal would correct me, is that let mankind awaken, and they will all call Hussein is ours. So that's the essence, if you like, the message of this martyrdom which took place on the plains of Karbala in Iraq. The martyrdom of Imam Hussein in 680 AD was a momentous event in the early part of the Islamic history. He is the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad and son of Ali, one of the four caliphs. His strong faith in the divine message of his grandfather pushed him to take a stand against the Umayyad rulers of that time, Yazid in particular, who was the, if you like, the king at that time of the Muslim Empire, whom he viewed with contempt and vocal criticism. When he made his last stand in Karbala with 72 of his relatives and companions, he declared the aim of his movement to seek reform and justice in the community left behind by his grandfather. He was subsequently martyred, with those loyal individuals only to remain a source of inspiration for the millions who continue to seek justice, reform, and dignity. The Islamic calendar, which is Muharram, this month we are living in, starts with particular tragedy, and it is commemorated all over the Muslim world, whether one is Shia or Sunni or any other ilk, all Muslims do commemorate. However, over the last couple of weeks, I've been receiving emails from some of my Arab friends in the Middle East saying congratulations on the 1st of Muharram. So that is another trend which is developing, that to congratulate rather than sort of commemorate and think of the significance. I don't want to take too much time of our speakers. I just want to relate one particular story that I experienced here in London some years ago. And this is where the whole narrative of this particular movement needs to be looked at and presented in a manner which resonates with the people and the ordinary individuals living in London, Paris, New York, or Sydney. There's usually a demonstration on the 40th day of Muharram in London, and other demonstrations that take place to commemorate this particular occasion. And about 10 years ago, there was one white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, dare I say, gentleman came over to a young man who was distributing leaflets in Marble Arch and asked him, out of curiosity, as to why this particular demonstration is taking place. And the young man, obviously whatever knowledge he had, he started saying to this English chap that he was a horrible man. He used to drink alcohol, he used to fornicate, he was a gambler, and he used to have a dog at home. So the Englishman said, "Really? I have all these things. Am I like Yazid?" So the whole narrative has to be understood and seen. Anyway, I kept quiet. I asked the young man to come over to me after the discussion. I said, "Look, perhaps if you had said he was like Hitler, he would, people would have understood clearly who Hussein was and who Yazid was, and how the politics of the time resonates with what has happened historically in the last century and currently what's happening in the Middle East, where the tribal rulers have started using their power in a similar manner that Yazid did. And obviously, there's another saying in the Islamic phraseology which says that every place is Karbala and every day is Ashura, which is the 10th day. So this is a stand to take up against oppression, which brings that very clearly in 2016, when we are seeing all kinds of monstrosities being committed on ordinary people, whether it's killing taking place in Aleppo, or what's happening in Mosul now, or the economic crisis that ordinary people are facing here in the West. So it's an oppression of a different type, if you like. So, when you give a chair a mic, they tend to go on for a long time, so I won't do that now. I will request our first speaker, whom I'll introduce. And it always gives me great pleasure. I think it's the third time this year I've had the pleasure. Once he was chairing a meeting and I was speaking, and twice I was chairing and he's speaking, and he's my mentor and really admire him immensely. He's a special advisor to the Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain on business and economic affairs, and a tutor on MCB Leadership Development Programme. In the late 1980s, he was the editor-in-chief of Afkar, a groundbreaking news and analysis journal published in London. His current interests are in Islamic and moral finance. He was awarded the CBE in 2005 Queen's Honours List for services to international development. So it's almost a decade since our first speaker got the CBE. Perhaps he's in the next honours list to be knighted. Please welcome Brother Iqbal Sharia, Dr. Professor Iqbal Sharia, in a warm manner.
Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Salatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal makhluqeen. Sayyidina wa nabiyyina wa shafi'ina Abul Qasim Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Amma ba'd. I would like to thank the foundation for inviting me, and for Brother Shabir for introducing this subject. In this Muharram, the 10 days of Muharram, I have given 3 lectures on justice at the Mahfil, and you could see them on Sikkim TV if you wanted to follow 3 one-hour-long discussions. But today, our time is limited to 20 minutes, so we're not going to go on for 3-4 hours. We're just going to set a scene here. And I would like to start with a couplet, again in Urdu, but I will translate it for people who don't know Urdu. And this is from Khwaja Moinuddin Chishti. Khwaja Moinuddin Chishti, of course, is the founder of the Chishtiya Tariqa. And if you go to Ajmer even today, you will see the kind of following he has. So in the context of Karbala and the Shahadat of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, he says, Shah hast Hussain, Badshah hast Hussain, Deen hast Hussain, Deepana hast Hussain, Sardad Nadad Dardast Yazid, Hafka ke bina ila ila hast Hussain. He says, Hussain is king and Hussain is king of kings. Hussain is religion and Hussain is the establisher of religion. Hussain is the person who did not bow down to Yazid when it came to truth and justice. He did not submit and was ready to be sacrificed. Now this is of course Khwaja Moinuddin Chishti, who is obviously one of the quite close followers of the Ahlul Bayt and the tradition as a leader of a leading tariqa in the Indian subcontinent. So we want to try to put this whole subject matter into context. I'd like to begin by trying to see something which Ibn Khaldun in his Muqaddimah outlines. Ibn Khaldun, as you know, was this great Maghrabi historian and was in perhaps one of the early founders of history, of the methodology of history. Because history is much more than a chronicle of events. History needs to be understood at a much more deeper level. Ibn Khaldun takes a much more sociological approach to history, whereby he goes beyond the events. So he says here that generally civilizations rise and fall in a very predictable pattern. So you have people who come together, who develop, who specialize, and who grow, and who become wealthier. And normally this development is tied to blood relationships and fellow feeling amongst a select group of people. When they become what we like to call today developed and cultured, they have a problem. Now they do not want to fight for their defense. So they normally recruit mercenaries. And in time, these mercenaries take over their empire because they have no capacity to defend themselves when this happens. And so it says ebb and flows of civilizations move like that, based mainly on asabiya, which is blood relationships, and fellow. I said this is obviously what I see when I read history. This is how things have developed. But when I come to the time of the Prophet, I find something very strange. This is Ibn Khaldun saying, I'm just paraphrasing from his Muqaddimah to the history of the world. I said, I'm finding that here is a prophet whose early followers are not from his family. In fact, the majority of the Quraysh are his ardent and deep opponents. It's they who tried to kill him several times after he refused to submit. So his followers, Ibn Khaldun says, you find people like Bilal, who is African, Salman, who is Persian, Abu Zar, who is nowhere near the Quraysh elite, and so on. So really, people in the peripheries of that society. And this prophet wants to preach his religion quite contrary to the norms of history which I have seen. So it's really the power of the message which carries this. Of course, many of the Quraysh later joined and so on. But this is the initial scenario when there was the most trying times. It was supported by these people, Ammar, Miqdad, and so on. And he said this really created a new ambience in the culture of Makkah and Medina. That tribal ties, blood ties were there, but they were not dominant. The Prophet introduced a completely new paradigm that really it was Iman or belief, the strength of your belief, and your taqwa, the strength of your behavior based upon your belief, which counted. Whoever was better in this was the leader. There was no question. This new kind of intervention in history, if you like, the prophetic charisma and power, never went down well with the old order. And we know, for example, that his own uncles and his tribesmen, many of them only accepted Islam in the last couple of years. And they always had it in their mind that somehow we will overturn this order. We cannot live with this kind of thing. We have to go back. And so, during the 30, 40 years following the Prophet's life, Prophet's passing away, you find this old trend reasserting itself. And Ibn Khaldun says that this is what I see, that the rise of nepotism, clannishness, favoritism, which overcomes the Muslim community, is sort of trying to bring back that order which the Prophet had totally destroyed. Now here, we find obviously several people resisting this and then not being able to do much, and then other powers and other groups gaining power over a period of time. Now, this is the question in a religious context at the center of justice. Because justice is based on fundamentally the rule of law, or the rule of the vision of Islam here in this context, and accountability. If you lose either of these, gradually society will degenerate. And we see, for example, that whilst the first caliphs after the Prophet used to refer to themselves as Khalifat Rasulullah, we are the successors to the Prophet. After Imam Ali alayhi salam, these people started to refer to themselves as Khalifatullah. We have directly from Allah. We have no need for the Prophet here. We have our own authority, which we can. Other things started to happen. This is something which we need to take on board. A lot of non-Arab people started to accept Islam. Those who were called Mawalis and so on, quite a lot of Iranians, quite a lot of other people. And now, the question of distribution from the Baytul Mal came. Again, there was a tendency to start a differential distribution of wealth from the Baytul Mal, depending on whether you were Arab or you were Mawali or this and that. And this kind of development in that society clearly required a check. So, what we see in the movement of Imam Hussain alayhi salam is clearly that break to this. So here we have, for example, Yazid ibn Muawiyah sending an order to Imam Hussain that you must pledge allegiance to me. In that context, effectively it means you must legitimize my khilafah. And Imam Hussain says, this cannot be done given your character and your conduct. Because if I do that, as the last surviving grandson of the Prophet, then Muslims will take that as no, and they are gone. And so he resisted. He said, okay, let me go, I don't pledge allegiance. But Yazid said, no, you have to pledge allegiance. And that is which led to the events of Karbala, where you had this gruesome massacre, which ultimately woke up the consciousness of the Muslim community that there is a message here which needs to be understood in the context of justice and the principles of Islam. And all Muslims are agreed that this was a very, very wrong turn of events. And in the context of Ibn Khaldun, this was one of the ways in which the Banu Umayyah tried to bring back blood relationships into and kinship into the Islamic fold. So the events of Karbala happened. Now you can see how much control they exercised on information. So several years after Karbala, for example, there was a practice of cursing Imam Ali alayhi salam from the pulpit, just in order to make sure that that legitimacy was not questioned. And just after Karbala, the next year, when Yazid tried to submit Medina to his will, they objected and he ransacked Medina. He destroyed the Prophet's mosque, and then he destroyed Makkah as well. And for 3 days, the Prophet's mosque, there was no prayer in the Prophet's mosque for 3 days. And they tried to tie their horses and things in the Prophet's mosque. This kind of behavior has clearly shocked the community there. But anybody objecting would be put to death. So there was complete control on information. Now, my last point is that sometimes when it comes to the matter of justice, it's not only sacrificing your life, but also finding a way to propagate your cause. Now, if you look at people who were left behind in Karbala, basically the family of the Imam, especially his son, Imam Zainul Abidin, who was ill, they had to figure out how to break this stranglehold on information. And I think they found a most ingenious way out. In the prison in Damascus and elsewhere, they started to gather in their family only and mourn the events of Karbala, loudly and publicly. Nobody could stop their mourning, but these mourning ceremonies, they spread like ripples across the people who wanted to convey the message. And what we see today across the Islamic world is those mourning ceremonies still being practiced in different way and different way. This has become a very standard way of publicizing this injustice. So here you have in this example of Imam Hussein and his family, the upholding of the principles of justice, even at the cost of your life, and a methodology of propagating that cause. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much, Dr. Professor Duvalasaria, for your usual presentation in a short space of time. Well, it's very difficult to do justice to a big topic like this, but thank you very much for presenting it in a way that I'm sure will give thought to some questions. Our next speaker is kindly joined us just now, and I'll introduce him, and thank you very much. I'm so sorry that you had some delay in the transport. He was born in Beckenham, Kent. After finishing school, he went to Corpus Christi College in Oxford in 1974 and was awarded a degree in physics. He worked for 2 years at the GEC Hurst Research Centre. I won't read the whole details of it because you've received all the flyer. One of the interesting things that I noticed that you're somehow connected with Balaam. Balham. I'm from Balham, so you know there is a place called Balham, you know, so that makes me feel good. That
One of your congregation.
so Balham was also made famous by a comedian, Gateway to the South. Those of us who are of a certain age will remember that outside Clapham South Station there used to be a big banner saying that now you're entering the South. So that's where the South used to begin. Anyway, I do please welcome our next speaker, Bishop Paul Hendrick, in a warm manner.
There's just one or two things I'd like to add to those background notes. When I became a bishop, when anyone becomes a bishop in the Catholic Church, they ask you, in addition to your local duties, what would you like to do at the national level? You'll get involved in these different tasks. And I said, well, I'd prefer something to do with dialogue with other churches and dialogue with other faiths. And so I'm very happy that they agreed to that. And so in the last 10 years, I've been very much enjoying all forms of dialogue, really, because I find that tremendously enriching, and it really helps me to deepen my own faith, as well as to learn more about other faiths. Taking the title Martyrdom, Justice and Reform, I think if we were going to examine Christian ideas of justice and reform, I think we'd find they're pretty much the same as Islamic ideas. But it seems to me that when it comes to the concept of martyrdom, there are very important differences, and for that reason I want to concentrate on that aspect of the theme, the concept of martyrdom. The very word martyr means witness, and in the case of Imam Hussein, a witness to certain principles, as we've just been hearing, principles of justice and reform against the misuse of religion by those in power. And that seems to me, I very strongly believe that is a very serious issue, that misuse of religion by those in power. It was common throughout the centuries, and sadly is very much with us still to the present day in many parts of the world, in all sorts of different situations. And it's said that the perversion of that which is good leads to that which is worst. And for that reason, I do believe that that sort of misuse of religion is a very serious matter. As I understand it, Ashura and Muharram are observed with emotions of sadness and regret for the injustices that have occurred in the past, as well as a resolve to promote justice in our own time. And in the Christian tradition, the concept of martyrdom is very different. It's much more positive. Now, that will sound very strange, and I need to explain that. And in order to do that, I need to touch on a unique and a fundamental feature of Christianity. And I would say that without understanding this, one can't actually understand Christianity. Because the essential Christian message is not a set of commandments, or even teachings about God, but a statement about a specific historical event. Well, obviously we believe it's historical. That Jesus died and rose from the dead. Obviously people have different views on this, but this is what we believe. Now, consequences follow from that, and Christian doctrine and theology is based on that. But the primary thing is a historical statement. Jesus died and rose from the dead. Amongst the consequences would be the idea that rising from the dead vindicates the claim that Jesus is the Messiah, or which is the word Christ is just Greek for Messiah, and also that he is the Son of God. And obviously then it took centuries for Christians to work out exactly what that implied, and that would be a very long story. But along with the belief in the resurrection of Jesus, there is also the belief that he promises to share that with us. if we are faithful to him. And it's no accident that the entry into being a Christian is baptism, which has a very evocative symbolism, the idea of going down into the water of baptism and coming up the other side. And there's a fundamental text in St. Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 6, which speaks about, as we go into the water, we die, as it were, symbolically with Christ, in order to rise up with him to a new life. And it's a difficult thing to explain because it is symbolic. Obviously, we don't literally die, but on the other hand, it's more than just a sign. It does have an effect in our life, and it's quite a subtle idea. Now, this dying with Christ and rising to a new life, it's something which happens already in this life and continues through into the next life. And this is very closely associated with the idea of martyrdom, because the martyrs are seen as the greatest possible witnesses to that faith in the resurrection. Because clearly, if you're just about to die, you haven't got any prospects in this life. So you wouldn't be willing to sacrifice your life unless you obviously believed very firmly in our future in the next life. But it's also essential to realise that this is not simply a choice to die. It's not something which is chosen, as it were, directly. It's a choice to accept death rather than to renounce one's faith in Jesus. And one good example of that would be St. Thomas More, who died around about 400 years ago. And he said very clearly, he was a lawyer, and he was very clear about this. He was perfectly happy and more than happy to accept any, to make any statement that he could make, that the king wanted him to make, if it was consistent with his conscience. If he could conscientiously sign a certain statement, then he would. He wouldn't seek it. But on the other hand, when he found himself in a position where he was no longer able to do that, where in order to obey the king's command, he would have to do something which he could not do with a clear conscience, then he accepted death rather than do something which he knew was wrong. And it seems to me that, I hope I'm right in saying that the concept of Ashura will be similar, not seeking death, but being willing to sacrifice one's life if it's necessary to uphold justice. On the other hand, it does require a choice. A choice is required. Someone who is simply killed for being a Christian is not automatically a martyr, if no choice is involved. So if someone were to come up and shoot me, just out of the blue, that wouldn't, and even if it was because I was a Christian, that wouldn't make me a martyr. I would only be a martyr if I had a choice to either to be shot or to renounce my faith in Christ. Then that would make me a martyr. It may be indirect. There's a good example in the life of and the death of Oscar Romero, Bishop Oscar Romero, who championed the poor and he criticised injustice in, I think it was El Salvador. And he knew, though, that this would make him a target, and he had received death threats, and he nevertheless persisted in doing what he, what was right, and insisting on and campaigning for justice for the poor. And so he is rightly regarded as a martyr, even though at the moment of his death he wasn't presented with a choice, but it was the consequence of a choice that he'd made earlier. Now, in the earlier centuries, when Christianity was illegal, martyrdom was relatively common in the time of the Roman Empire, at least before it became legalised under Constantine. And in those days, martyrdom was seen as the perfect way of following Jesus. For two reasons. One, it imitates him in his death. And so, in that sense, we're following in his footsteps in the most perfect way possible. But also, it implies the ultimate degree of faith for the reason that I've given, because you can't express your faith more perfectly than by being willing to be killed rather than to renounce it. There's an ancient saying that the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. And there's very much one of the reasons why Rome is perhaps the preeminent, at least a very famous Christian centre, is not only because of St. Peter and being the first pope and so on, but also because of the large number of martyrs that are associated with Rome. But of course, once Christianity was legalised, then persecution and martyrdom became much less common. It didn't die out altogether, as we know. There are many martyrs in our own time. But nevertheless, it was much less common. So the question arose, how would one follow Jesus perfectly now that martyrdom is not an option, or not a common option anyway? And that's where we find the origins of the monastic movement and what we call the religious life. It's a different sort of witness, but there's one similarity. Because a monk or a nun doesn't marry, and same for a non-married priest, because they don't marry, therefore they have no children, and therefore, in a certain sense, they have no future in worldly terms. They don't. They're in a certain sense, one's children. They're your future, aren't they? In a certain sense. And so, in that sense, like martyrdom, it's a sign of faith in our future life with Jesus. I'm hoping I'm sticking to the time reasonably. I'm nearly at the end now. So, I'd conclude by saying that martyrdom is absolutely central to Christianity. Not that you've got to be a martyr in the literal sense, but the basic concept of martyrdom is nevertheless very, very closely tied up with all that Christianity is about. Because Christianity is not just about how to live a moral life, observing justice and things like that. Now, admittedly, we even fail in that. So I'm not saying that we measure up even purely in terms of justice and so on. We all fail in many ways. But the idea of death and resurrection being at the heart of our religion does fundamentally affect its character. You can see the contrast if you look at something like the book of Proverbs in the Old Testament. Basically, the message is do good and you will prosper. But at the heart of Christianity, there's a paradox, and that's associated with the whole symbol of the cross, the whole concept and the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus. That paradox that says that you can only live fully by being willing to die. I'll leave it there.
Bishop Hendricks, very kind of you for joining us. I'll move speedily to our next speaker. I would just say that, just like in English, the word martyr means witness. The shaheed also means witness in Arabic.
It's the same.
It's the same, exactly. It's the same meaning. So it's quite interesting how linguistic changes don't make change the meaning of it.
In Arabic, is a witness on his death.
Mm-hmm. And also ordinarily, if you're a witness, you say that, you are shaheed. Our next speaker is a poet, a writer, chartered electronic communication engineer and barrister. He's a member of the British Bar. He holds a PhD in microwave communications engineering, PhD in international law. And suffice to say that his publications include poetry collection in Arabic and Diwan Abi Talib, another poetry, and also Trial of Saddam. Please welcome our next speaker, Dr. Abdul Haq Al-Ani. Thank you very much.
بسم الله وحده والصلاة والسلام على محمد وآله بعده. السلام عليكم. What I'm going to say is unconventional. and may not be well received by some of you, that's both Muslims and Christians.
This is an open discussion.
But I know no other way but to say what I believe when I'm invited to talk. I'm not out to antagonize or upset anybody, but I want those who are willing to listen to appreciate that the roads to the Lord are as many as His own creation. I base all what I'm going to say on Quran. That is, to me, the infallible words of Allah. And my interpretation of that text, and I believe my interpretation is as good as any. Let me say from the outset, just in case halfway through somebody gets upset, I'm not out to deny the historical event of the martyrdom of Hussein, nor indeed do I deny the event of the crucifixion of Jesus. All I'm going to establish is that what people thought had happened did not actually in reality happen. That's the theme of what I'm going to say. And I'm basing all what I'm saying on the Quranic text. Now, in citing Quran, I'm going to, as I ought to do, say the verse in Arabic and then follow that with as good an English interpretation as possible. Now, to talk about justice and martyrdom from an Islamic perspective takes me to the Quranic text on the creation of Adam and the disobedience of the devil. That is my starting point. And that's where I'm going to argue what justice means in Islam and follow from that what martyrdom is. There are several references in the Quran to that event of the creation of Adam. But I'm going to choose verses from chapter 7, Surah Al-A'raf. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَاكُمْ ثُمَّ صَوَّرْنَاكُمْ ثُمَّ قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ اسْجُدُوا لِآدَمَ فَسَجَدُوا إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ لَمْ يَكُنْ مِنَ السَّاجِدِينَ. And we have certainly created you and given you human form. Then we said to the angels, prostrate to Adam. So they prostrated, except for Iblis, who was not of those prostrated. Iblis, incidentally, is the name of the devil in the Quran. He's the head of the tribe of the devils, because in Islam, the devil actually procreates. He's got sons and descendants and so on. Second verse. قال, that's Allah. قال ما منعك ألا تسجد إذ أمرتك قال أنا خير منه خلقتني من نار وخلقته من طين. Allah said, what prevented you from prostrating when I commanded you? Iblis said, I'm better than him. You created me from fire and created me from clay. Incidentally, this is the question of analogy, which as far as the Shia theology is concerned, this was the first time that analogy was used. And that's why the Shia today differ from the Sunnis in not accepting analogy as one of the pillars of fiqh in Shia theology. Because Iblis actually did use an analogy between fire and clay, and he thought fire was superior, which of course it was not, because clay had water, and water, according to that concept, water is superior to fire. قال فاهبط منها فما يكون لك أن تتكبر فيها فاخرج إنك من الصاغرين. Allah said, descend from paradise, for it is not for you to be arrogant therein. So get out, indeed you are of the debased. قال أنظرني إلى يوم يبعثون. Iblis said, reprieve me until the day they are resurrected. قال إنك من المنظرين. Allah said, indeed you are of those reprieved. قال فبما أغويتني لأقعدن لهم صراطك المستقيم. Iblis said, by what you have tempted me, I will surely sit and wait for them on your straight path. ثم لآتينهم من بين أيديهم ومن خلفهم وعن أيمانهم وعن شمائلهم ولا تجد أكثرهم شاكرين. Then I will come to them from their before and from their behind, and from their left and from their right, and you will not find most of them grateful. قال اخرج منها مذءوما مدحورا لمن تبعك منهم لأملأن جهنم منكم أجمعين. Allah said, get out of paradise, reproach and expel whosoever follows you among them, I will surely fill hell with you altogether. That's the end of the citation from Al-Arab. Now, clearly from that, one would conclude that